Welcome everyone to this webinar on addressing COVID-19, fostering equity in and out of the classroom. This webinar is jointly created and held by the Section on Democracy and Social Justice, or DSJ, of the American Society for Public Administration, as well as the Diversity and Social Equity Committee of NASPAA. Just so you know, we are recording this event and plan on posting it to DSJ social media within a few days. My name is Sean, and I've served on the DSJ board for a few years. It was actually Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson who got me on the board originally as a board member all those years ago. And I'm also the current chair of DSJ since January 2020, and I served to 2021. I'm just not going to be on camera because it's easier to edit the video to include written the questions that we're going to be incorporating later. But before we introduce our panelists, I would like to give special thanks to 4 people. And these are Dr. Mohammed Al-Qadri, Dr. Blandy Bressett, and Dr. Blue Wooldridge, all of NASPAA's DEI committee, who fully supported this effort across these sections of professional organizations. And I'd also like to thank DSJ's excellent social media editor, Parisa Vincent, who is also here and helping me out. Instrumental, she's been absolutely instrumental in making this webinar happen, as well as all of DSJ's other programming. But as a context, we proposed this webinar after seeing many of the equities that students face, especially students from historically marginalized populations in particular, especially the faced due to COVID. We saw campuses shut down. We saw some students find themselves without homes, without access to technology to complete the work. And we in both DSJ and DEI wondered what we can do to promote equity, especially given how many campuses may be, going to face-to-face in the fall or not, debating what to do. And what I'd ask Parisa to also share right now is Dr. Susan Gooden's statement of the VCU Wilder School, who noted recently that we find ourselves not only in a pandemic, but in a double pandemic. That is COVID-19 and police brutality and killings. And these two pandemics are both distinct, yet they're also related. So what we hope to do is use this time today to address broad issues of racism, white supremacy, inequities, and injustices, as well as our responsibilities to promote equity and justice for all. And we'd also like to share with you DSJ's statement, which was crafted with the help of several people on this call, as well as the DSJ board, about really our need for action to go forward. And finally, we can get to our panelists, this is also part of some of our extended programming we're doing in DSJ throughout the year. We'd like to share with you a link for our next webinar, which is on June 18th. It's the first of a 6-part series on ethics education, also featuring some of the people on the call today. Our first webinar is going to feature Dr. Agatha Caraballo, Dr. Carol Yevikovich, Dr. James Farr, and Dr. Blue Wooldridge. And we're going to be addressing police-community relations, COVID-19, and these other issues head on to see what's needed to promote ethical competency, equity, justice, and public administration at all levels. So I'm going to just stop talking here in just a little bit, but I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists. We're pleased to be joined today by Dr. Rajay Berry James of North Carolina State University, Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson III of the University of San Francisco, Dr. Kathleen Yang Clayton of the University of Illinois Chicago, and Dr. Meghna Sabharwal of the University of Texas at Dallas. In terms of logistics, we'd like to prioritize having a great conversation, so I'm just going to start with 2 or 3 questions that we in DSJ drafted with NASPAA DEI. And again, giving these topics ideally to promote a conversation, panelists may end up raising new questions and conversations. And we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. If you have a question, please use the chat function. If you'd like to be unmuted to ask a question or make a statement, we'd also like you to do that in the chat function as well, especially if it's a question, because we want to keep track of the great conversation that we're having here, especially to give us new ideas, but also to really help with the video editing. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see our wonderful panelists. And I'd just like to start with our first question to the panelists. So it's this: many students face equity issues caused by COVID-19. And this, such as essentially becoming homeless when campus housing closes, or having little to no internet access, and experiencing many disparities, especially along race, gender, and more, due to COVID-19. And these issues are only compounded by feelings of security and lack of safety caused by recent police killings, many of which these killings have seemingly little or no action taken against them. So I'm just curious, we're curious, what equity issues have you seen students face in particular, and what have been the efficacy of government and nonprofit responses to it, and what do we need to do to improve those responses? So any of you want to go?
Should we go in an order, Sean?
Sure. Well, yeah. Well, why don't we start with, if it's okay, just maybe Jade, and then Kathleen, then Ricardo, then Megna, just because that's the order I see you on my screen.
Sure. I am used to starting first. My last name has been Barry my whole life, and so I'm good with that. Thank you very much for giving me some time and space to share some of my thoughts and feelings that really come from my heart. I want to let you know that I've been in the field of higher education as a professional since 1987. That dates me quite a bit, but what it also does is it allows me to have um, really important experiences. I've met a lot of people, but I've also seen a lot of things. Um, so I work at North Carolina State University. I'm the associate professor in public administration there. I'm also chair-elect of the Faculty Senate. I'll start my term in July of 2020. I am a NAPA fellow as well as a current sitting member of the NASPAA um, Executive Council, and I had previously served as a member of the ASPA National Council for about 10 years. But none of my comments are really all about where I've been or where I've worked, right? My comments are about what I've seen, what I research, and how I think about particular issues. So I'll just go ahead and say that first. Um, I want to tell you that there are a couple issues that we should really be paying attention to. Earlier today, before this call, while I should have been prepping for the call, I was listening to the Senate hearing talking about the COVID related issues in higher education. As you know, some of you may know that the Center for Disease Control has issued a statement, of a guidance statement, if you will, about COVID-19 on colleges and university campuses. In other words, the guidance is used to help us plan and prepare for going back to school in August or September, whenever you do. But there's some real issues with our preparation. We have a lot of important campus leaders on this call, and also who are actively engaged in making sure that we can go back to work, that we can go back to school, that we could do the things that we love to do, that we could research and teach and talk, have discourse about what's really important for the state of higher education. However, one of the things that was brought up in the Senate hearing today is that the guidance from CDC doesn't give any instruction on testing, right? And it's kind of odd. I did my own word search and there was no instruction, no guidance, no information about testing on college campuses. And so what that means is it's problematic a little bit in that colleges and universities are left out there to do testing on their own, to fight for resources that we already know don't necessarily exist. We understand that there is a problem with our supply chain. While you may get some tests, you may not get all the kinds of things that you need to operate safely student health services. So that's a big issue. A second issue, and I won't name all the issues, but trust and believe I have them all written down. The second issue is really about financial aid. As you know, many students use the financial aid form income in the previous year to talk about or identify how much they can afford to spend on college and universities. The problem there is that last year's income is significantly different from this year's first half income. So while financial aid offices might have said that you could take out loans at this particular level, or you can use your earnings at that particular level to pay for tuition and housing, room and board, if you will, the reality is many of our college students are unemployed. They don't have income to depend on. Their parents are unemployed, and it's a real significant crisis in many communities, and particularly the Black and Brown communities. And I'll just stop right there.
Thank you.
Should I just
Okay.
Yes,
go?
please go ahead, Dr. Yan Clayton.
Okay, all right, cool. Well, thank you for having me on this panel. It's really great to just put some faces to names that I've been going back and forth on email with. So my story is a little bit different than Rajad's. So basically, I am a clinical assistant professor. I joined the faculty at the University of Illinois Chicago in 2017 after a fairly long career in legislative advocacy on behalf of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, both in Illinois and across the country. So I joined because I really needed to recharge. It's grueling work being out in the advocacy space, and that was back in 2017. So I cannot even imagine what it feels like right now. And when I started in fall of 2017, I was teaching my first class. It was nonprofits and civil society. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but basically our then newly elected president had basically decided it was really an important policy move to rescind DACA. And I was in the class and, just I knew it happened. I knew communities I had worked in and people were panicking and all that stuff, but it really um, brought it home to me how important the public mission of my university is when I think I had 7 students independently write to me, panicked. They had to get back to, their home in Dallas or back in California because they had to go and re-up for this and they were worried about their family. They were having all these problems. And it really dawned on me, like when you're at an institution that really serves, it has a public mission, you really have to be very aware of all of the different challenges that our students are existing in. So I guess, I wanted to compliment a little bit of what was said already about testing and financial aid. A lot of the work that I do actually focuses a lot on institutionalized racism in public agencies. And I look specifically at structures and processes, standard operating procedures that end up generating biased outcomes consistently over and over. So you can have some statement about how we're all racially just and we're going to have this committee and that committee and still look at the outcomes of, let's say, what faculty composition looks like in certain departments and who's getting the postdocs and all that, and sort of challenging the disconnect between making a statement versus real commitment to institutional change. So I think that with respect to what's happening right now in terms of what had previously already existed as racial inequity, I mean, you could tell when students walked in who had the newest laptops or who was just working off of, their Chromebook that they probably inherited from somebody or whatever, and just the unevenness of their cultural competency or their social capital. Like it's across the board, like really overwhelming to try to think about what COVID did to just pull that gap even further apart. And so now as we're being challenged to go completely online, so UIC's stance is we're not going back into classes. I teach a class that has over, I think the cutoff was 70. So now I have to pre-record all my classes. I can't teach anything synchronously. And so we're scrambling because part of the challenge with students who are first generation, whether they are first generation Americans and they're first time at four-year college, or if they're third generation Americans from the South or West sides of Chicago and first generation college, they need support that goes well beyond staring at a screen and listening to a video. It goes well beyond a co-curricular. If we can't figure stuff like that, I'm really afraid of what the exacerbated outcomes are going to look like in the fall. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson. And actually, before Dr. Johnson speaks, I'd just like to say we shared an article, his recent article on forgotten populations in Me Too, written with Dr. Hugo Renderos, and also strongly implicating all the topics that we're talking about. So sorry, Dr. Johnson, I just wanted to put a plug in for your article.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Dr. McCandless. And good afternoon to all of my esteemed colleagues on this panel. It is so great to be here with you all. And again, kudos to DSJ, Professor McCandless and Harrison, and all of those who have joined us on this call. I think that my perception of this situation, particularly addressing COVID and students from specifically Black and Brown students and those students from marginalized communities. So I speak from a sort of more personal perspective, and that is most of DSJ and my friends, my colleagues on the panel know that I lost my dad to COVID in New York City a month ago, and 2 maternal aunts as well. And so therefore this entire situation has been particularly draining for me. However, I think that in addition to what my two colleagues mentioned earlier, the thing that I would add that's so critical as we go through this is the emotional toll that it takes on students. And that's something that's not being addressed, generally speaking. There certainly is the need for, and I agree with Kathleen's last statement, that support is so great. But we've got to make sure that that our students are feeling emotionally uh, prepared for everything that's coming in the fall. We have to make sure that they are feeling emotionally prepared to be back in the classroom. For example, University of San Francisco, our plan right now is to actually have students on campus starting in August. Now, how that will actually play out, I think the administration is still looking at, but certainly it's in opposite to some of our peer institutions, UC Berkeley and the CSUs are not having classes at all in the fall. So it will be interesting for yourself to sort of go down this path of having students and faculty and staff on campus. But again, my thing comes down to the emotional toll that has played out on a number of students, even in the MPA program that I teach in. And I'm sorry, I didn't say earlier that I'm professor and department chair of the Public and Nonprofit Administration program at USF, University of San Francisco. And this is actually I've actually been teaching close to 20 years, first 11 years at the University of Vermont, where I was tenured and promoted to associate professor, and then was recruited to the University of San Francisco. And I've been here since, and that was based upon my research in social equity. But, again, I think for me, the real challenge for us is to make sure that the emotional toll that this pandemic is having on our students is minimized, because you can't have students, even with all the resources in the world, if the emotional state is not good, then they're not able to learn, they're not able to focus. And certainly what we do know from the pandemic already is that the communities being overwhelmingly impacted are Black and Brown communities. We're definitely seeing that here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I would probably argue that across the country. So therefore, I think that as faculty members, we have even a bigger, because we need to take a bigger concerted effort to make sure that our students are feeling safe, that they're feeling as though they're being listened to, and that their faculty members care about them. They can again have all of the resources in the world uh, from the university, but if they don't have that in place, then I don't think that they're going to do well. So, and not to mention, if we have more time, I will discuss the faculty side of the house, and what faculty need to do to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. Like I said, I just lost 3 family members within a month period. And so emotionally, I'm not that great. So, um, so I think we also have to make sure that our faculty members, our staff members are also feeling supported emotionally. This has been a draining pandemic, and it's not over yet. So, I'll stop my comments there.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meghna Sabarwal. Firstly, I want to thank Sean. I want to thank ASPA and NASPA for both sponsoring this panel, and I'm honored to be part of this panel with my esteemed colleagues. Richard, I'm really profoundly sorry for your loss. It's been a tough time. I can't even imagine not being there with the family, and it's a very hard situation. And likewise, I'm sure several of us are faced with some very tough situations right now, including our students and faculty. And so thank you again, Richard, for mentioning that we need to talk about faculty too. Somehow there's this feeling that we are insulated, or we are these superhuman beings. Of course, students are the focus, and I completely agree that we have to focus, but faculty are equally important. So I'll start some of my comments by a little bit introduction about myself. I teach at the University of Texas at Dallas in the Public and Nonprofit Management program. I'm the department chair and associate professor. Was recently promoted to full. Officially, that title will go in September. Thank you. But I've been teaching there about 11 years now, and it's an excellent place, and we have a very diverse student body. In fact, at UT Dallas, we have 9,000 international students. We are probably among the largest number of international students in the country, the 12th largest in the doctoral giving program. So one third of our student body is international. And I would like to talk about all these various issues, but I thought let me focus a little bit on some of the challenges our international students are also faced with because of the COVID. International students cannot go back home to their home country right now. They cannot work on campus right now. Most of them, especially if they're in the bachelor's or master's program, are not funded. So they don't have any means right now to support themselves. Uh, Several of them had their internships canceled. So those are real challenges that they are faced with. And so what UTD's one of the UTD alumnus did, he created an emergency fund specifically for international students. And that's been very helpful. I've directed some of my own international students to use that fund, apply to that fund. UTD overall has created an emergency fund for the students, which I'm sure many other institutions have done so, that students can apply to. And we've received funding from the federal government, the CARES Act. Some of that money has come to, it's a public institution. So we have received some of that financial assistance, but I know that creates some inequities too for those who are on financial aid. It can create some challenges there if they tap into the fund. The issue of food insecurity is also prominent right now among our students. And so we have something called the Comet Cupboard, where faculty, staff, students can donate certain, food items, and that's been distributed, I know. For our faculty itself, not much, but we were given headsets. The first, I think, 100 who responded got some headsets. I responded, but I didn't muster the courage to go and travel to and take it from campus. It's probably still sitting there. I don't know, probably distributed. A lot of volunteers came together and made cloth masks and distributed that. Right now, campus is closed, but we opened it up 25% to certain research labs that are critical. And for fall, we don't quite know what will happen because it's such a fluid situation. And so we are monitoring that as well. But I agree with everything else that everyone else said. The emotional state is very important. So we are having a lot of webinars right now related to mental health, well-being, the change of working environment, the workplace right now. What does that mean for us? What about the LGBTQ plus population that we have? So there are some webinars being held by our gender center, and the challenges that they are faced with. So everybody is trying to pitch in, but it's a lot going on in a very short amount of time. And we are all in this together. We are all faced this situation together. So I'll stop my comments there, and I'll come back to a few other things, Sean.
Perfect, perfect. So I'd like to address something that all of you have implicitly talked about, which is also about the importance of teaching. So we're particularly interested in what can instructors and programs of public affairs, public administrations, and public policy do to teach the importance of equitable administrative and policy responses to COVID-19, and now indeed the double pandemic of COVID-19 and police brutality and killings. And if you want to go in the same order or whatever order you're inspired, that's absolutely fine.
Sean, if I could jump in, I'm sorry, before Dr. James Berry
Sure.
goes, I just want to make sure, I think that we have a responsibility to celebrate each of our milestones. And I want to make sure that we give Dr. Magna a hand for her promotion to full professor. It's not easy.
Yes.
Congratulations, my dear friend, and welcome to the rank of full professors.
Thank you. It's you don't achieve it on your own. It's a whole village, and I've had a whole village behind me. So thank you all for your support. Thank
Awesome.
you, SWAPA. So I've been the section chair for SWAPA, and that's such an excellent society. So thank you, everyone who's been there all along. Thank you, Richard, my friend.
And,
Thank you.
and, and Susan, Dr. Susan Gooden just sends you a congrats also in chat. I'm just seeing that. So
Thank you all.
you
Thank you
know
so much.
that you're well loved, you're well respected, and we're so thrilled for you.
Thank you. Love everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
Of course. Dr. Barry James?
Oh, sure. I think I heard you ask us, what should we be doing? And I say us because I'm a professor, and so in that us, I hear my role, right? And I think that my role really is to focus on the work. I love that Susan Gooden, my co-author of Why Research Methods Matter, she taught me well. She taught me that we always have to keep the main thing, and we have to focus on the work. And so, from a faculty point of view, the work is really about conducting research and teaching, right? And being present, being active and engaged. And so, if I had to, everyone is looking for one way to describe he or she or they, right, in terms of what the contribution is to colleges and university, and it's really on the work. And so, in in social justice, many of our programs talk about fairness and justice from using an equitable lens. But in social justice, the theory really focuses on equity for all. I think that the other piece of it is that the theory also focuses on action and systemic change. And that's where I think the work is for people in the field of public administration, public policy, and public affairs. And so part of the work in the early 80s, when I was at the table as a college administrator, talking about access and opportunity, looking at admissions, especially for special populations, the work was all about access, really how to create a gateway for inclusion and participation in higher education. And then the work began about agency, sense of belonging, right? Who really belongs here, and how do we make sure on a college campus that everyone feels a sense of belonging, that everyone has a group to align with, that everyone has a space to talk about their issues, that we all recognize that our job really is to serve students where we find them, to support each other as colleagues, and really to make sure that we demonstrate how important higher education is, for at least in our American context, and of course now for the world. The other piece is advocacy, right? Sometimes we get so focused on just ourselves doing the things that really benefit us, and as Magda pointed out, that the reality is that we're all in this together, right? And so being in this together means that each one of us has to sacrifice a little bit, right? Has to pay attention to the issues that we really need to focus on. And so this sense of advocacy means that we have to use our influence. Let me restate that. Our influence in terms of our time and talent, right? The way in which we understand things, the way in which we understand the issues, the way in which we can articulate the problem, the way in which we can propose policies and changes that really benefit all of us. That's really advocacy. And then the other piece is solidarity action. And I saw that in the field of public administration this very week, from the folks at NAPA with the folks at NASPAA and the folks at ASPA, all really focusing on systemic change, really recognizing that in fact it is true, according to the words of Susan Gooden, who eloquently said it, it is true that we have two crises on our hands. One, the COVID healthcare crisis, which was disproportionately impacting African Americans, and also other people who work on the front line, right? People who have to work, who work in all kinds of conditions. We're all related to people like that. The fact of the matter is there are some people who don't have access to personal protective equipment. I won't share any horror stories, but if you want me to make you cry, I will tell you about what's really going on all across America. The things that my family tell me, the things that people, our friends tell us about the rationing of protective equipment, those kinds of things that really protect them from this very severe virus. And then the other piece is the situation that really happened, the loss of life, not just in the African American community, but in the Asian community and in the Hispanic or the Latinx community. We see all kinds of people being hurt by agents of the government, right? By people who are public servants, by people who've professed to look out for the public interest. We see it on video. And so this crisis is not something that we can go back to business as usual. In fact, this crisis is something that demands that we focus on our work. And so if any of you know me at NC State, I have been pleased to be welcomed by the NC State community. And as soon as I got to NC State in my department as Director of Graduate Programs, I created a course on social equity. And then I created a course on cultural competence. And then I created a course on the MPA capstone, which really looks at the way in which we understand social equity as applied in our field of public administration, how we use our skills, the cultural competence skills to really address problems, and how we apply that to demonstrate that we have competencies in our field. And so many of you know that NASPAA also has revised and rethunk and tweaked and made sure it was appropriate that we have standards for the field of public administration, public policy, and public affairs. And those standards dictate that we focus on the work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, so I learned a lot and I was taking notes. So I think I'm going to just pick up on a small piece of what Professor Barry James was elevating, which is a little bit about this question of what is an institutional response. And the question was, try to point out an equitable response. And I was trying to be generous, and I will. So let me start with that, but then I'm going to go right into a fundamental critique, which I learned more about as I became more steeped in the literature of public administration. So just to be fair, in my training, I am a sociologist, but I really appreciated really getting to understand this literature that, people like Susan Gooden, I've read your stuff, so now I know what you're talking about. And so let me just say positives, real small positives, but positives. When we went offline, our university scrambled and tried to get technology into the hands of students that needed it, right? Wi-Fi, hotspots and stuff. It was a scramble, but they tried. Same thing with CPS. They started, our Chicago Public Schools, they started handing out free lunches, and they did a little bit of outreach to try to get technology to students. And even in the city of Chicago, right? Like our public health system, they started mobilizing, trying to get masks out there and everything. And it was both a private public partnership, fine. So then we start getting the results. And we find out that 60% of all of the deaths that we've had in Chicago have fallen on brown and Black communities. That close to 55% of all CPS students, of which 90% are Black and brown, have not been showing up to their online classes. And that even in our university, I had a class that I was trying to get across the finish line with 42 students, and albeit I had like 5 or 6 who I had already been like trying to chase after and be like, where are you? 15 disappeared, no matter what, right? No matter and so I think that the thing I want to really emphasize and highlight is something that actually stuck out to me, and something that I do think was in an article that I read, that maybe it was Gooden and Woolridge or something, where they were talking about the tension between equity and inefficiency and efficiency, and that most of our institutions right now have been ground down to a nub around efficiency. And what we genuinely need and needed is effectiveness. And effectiveness requires that we center racial equity and understanding where we need to be most effective. And what we saw was an institutional reaction, that kind of knee-jerk, hey, let me hand out some Wi-Fi things and we're done. And it's like, no. Or even our public health department, which I'm completely 100% behind them. They have been defunded to the point where there's like a skeletal crew, and you expect them to go and do the inefficient yet effective work of doing outreach into limited English, LGBTQ, homeless. Yeah, that, I mean, what were we expecting? I mean, not to say that it's not our job to expect it, but the outcomes of what we saw, which is the instant equitable response versus the tension, the underlying tension that many of you have been studying and pointing out for a while now between efficiency and effectiveness and then equity is really like that. I think this is an exciting moment for us to just come together and just start pushing for a sea shift in the way we think about budgeting and what we need as capacities as a thriving democracy.
Thank you.
Okay. I agree. I think Kathleen's points were so well taken. And before I begin my comments, Kathleen and Jade mentioned Susan, and I think it's really important as we continue to celebrate milestones that, you know, many people on the Zoom call know already, but some may not. And I just want to make sure that we acknowledge publicly that our own Dr. Susan Gooden has been promoted to the position of Dean of the Wilder School at VCU. That is huge. Congratulations, Dr. Gooden. We love you. We are so proud of you. You make us want to be better people and better academics. So as Dr. Berry mentioned, Dr. Gooden has been a role model for me and a mentor for all these years. And I'm not saying she's old, but I'm just saying she's been around. So thank you, Dr. Gooden. I think that I would frame my comments this way. As a social equity scholar, I have had to walk the walk alone. And when you're accustomed to walking alone, you become numb to a number of things that may go on in your institution. And I know that this has been the case with Dr. James Berry. She's had to do a number of things by herself at NC State, and I'm sure Dr. Magna has been in the same situation, and as well as Dr. Kathleen as well. I teach in what would be considered on most campuses the College of Business. This has not been easy for a social equity scholar, and when you're having tensions in your workspace, that can come out into the classroom, right? So I try to really surround myself with like people from other spaces. And it's not to suggest that my colleagues in the School of Management are not understanding or sympathetic, but they don't have to be. When you live in a world where you can be oblivious to almost everything that's going on, particularly in communities of color, you kind of tend to do that, which is unfortunate. But then what happens is that when someone from that community brings it to your attention and you ignore it, that becomes problematic. So it has been a challenge for me. I mean, I love the University of San Francisco. I love the School of Management, but it has been a challenge. It has been a challenge specifically in terms of my research and in terms of my teaching. You know, my colleagues always want to know, like, why are you still doing this social equity thing? You know, as opposed to something else, which they consider much more intellectually rigorous and also much more valid, right? And to them, I say, well, I won't tell you what I have told a number of them, but it wasn't quite pleasant, and it wouldn't be good for this recording. Let's just say that as a true New Yorker, that came out in me, right? And I don't have much dealings with those faculty, but I say that to say, you've got to be authentic, right? You cannot sidestep what we are trying to do here. We're trying to promote social equity. We're trying to make sure our students understand it. So when they go out, they can continue the dialogue, they can continue to work. If we don't, then who? And I just had a conversation yesterday with a doctoral student at Rutgers, and in fact, he may be on this call now, but my suggestion to him is that if social equity is a passion of his, then do it, because he had gotten information from, I'm not sure if it was one of his faculty members or another colleague, that he shouldn't consider social equity just coming out of his PhD program and trying to get a faculty position. I think that is so criminal. It's just absurd. And we, as individuals, senior faculty members on this panel, and even those that are in the audience, and even assistant professors, we have an obligation to make sure that our students know, our MPA students and our doctoral students and our bachelor students know that this is not just fun and games we're doing. This is legitimate. Uh, this is legitimate in every form. So anyway, let me not belabor so that my esteemed colleague, Dr. Magna, can speak. But those are my observations.
It's always a challenge going last because I feel like you all have said such good things. I don't know what to follow up. But thank you all. Sean asked a question about what can we as instructors and programs do in public affairs and public administration to address these issues of inequities. To me, I'm a scholar of diversity, inclusion, and equity, and that's at the heart of what I think is public administration is all about. So, pandemic or not, and let me say this again, pandemic or not, we should be talking about these issues on a daily basis. Yes, this has heightened our awareness about these issues right now. Everybody is talking about, also in the current racial injustice that we are witnessing around the US. I'll wear a little bit of my international hat and say these injustices are happening all around the world and are happening every second, every day. And we as public administrator scholars, we have the responsibilities and we bear the burden to talk about these issues. And so all the values of fairness, equity, justice, transparency, accountability, these should be at the very core of our teachings. In fact, they should be taught as easily in a HR class, in a public management class, as in a budgeting class, or a research design class, or a statistics class. We all should be not have, I mean, it's important to have. I've in fact started, just like Susan said, just like Jade said, she started a course at UNC, couple courses, not just one, several courses on this topic. I pushed for that at UTD as well. But again, I feel yes, there's a place to have that discussion because it's a dedicated space, but that doesn't mean others are away from that responsibility. They should be equally responsible, and we should be talking about those issues. Diversity, it become a buzzword. College campuses all want to look diverse. They want to say they are diverse. But I think the challenge comes is inclusion and equity. We bring diverse people together and we think that's good. We are doing a good job. I think we oftentimes forget, where are their voices? Are they being integrated? Are they being included in these decisions? And I think that's where we fail. And we need to do a better job at it. And especially now in this time, we definitely need more of those voices being heard than just a diverse face. I'll stop there, Sean.
Well, thank you. That was a wonderful comments. What we'd like to do is I'm going to ask one more question. We'd like to open it up to the audience for questions and comments. Just as a reminder, please type your questions and comments in the chat. If you would like to be unmuted to ask a question, please also ask the question in addition to asking to be unmuted, just so we can keep track of the questions and the great ideas that come up. Parisa will be helping me keep an eye out for who wants to ask questions. And so one other question for our group here is thinking a lot about the possible move to in-person classes in the fall, but also many of these equity issues that you have discussed. What are strategies and tactics instructors and programs can implement to prepare for this eventuality, especially for in-person classes, and especially to ensure that educational experiences are equitable? And then after this, we'll take audience questions.
I can talk about.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Please.
I
please,
can
please.
talk about something that we are doing, and probably most campuses are doing, is doing both asynchronous and synchronous forms of teaching. Now, that does put additional burden on a faculty because they are being told that in fall be prepared to teach in multiple formats, and that's a lot. We still have 24 hours in a day, and we still have our research. We still have family obligations. In fact, the family obligations, as we all are seeing, have probably doubled or tripled, if not. We have elder care, we have young children at home, and then we've been told that you might have to prepare these various formats or even a high flex, and faculty in a very short time have had to adapt to all of this. But we do understand, in fact, for our international students who are funded right now, PhD funded students who cannot come here because the consulates are closed, we are allowing them to register online, 9 credits, and their tuitions will be waived. But that means that we have to offer in both formats. We have to offer our doctoral classes possibly in both online format and a face-to-face for those who want that. And so again, it's quite unclear. It's an ongoing discussion right now. But those are some things that we are doing, at least in terms of addressing the needs of our students who are probably on the front line. Several of public administration students, as you all know, are firefighters, are in police, they are healthcare workers. So they are on the front lines and they cannot attend the synchronous. So we have to make sure we offer that asynchronous option, which we are doing right now in summer.
Thank you. And anyone can choose to go next. It's open field. Okay.
I'll jump in then. So I think that the thing that my colleague has just talked about at her institution is very impressive, and I'm so glad to hear that. I think that at the University of San Francisco, there are a couple of things that come to mind, maybe which may be a little bit different than other institutions. One, we are actually offering scholarships, like big scholarships to first responders, because we do believe that that population really needs to be recognized for the heroic efforts that they continue to do. So that's something that is really new to the university, and the mechanisms to get that done are being sought out now, and we'll see what happens with that. But secondly, we've been encouraged by the deans and the department chairs, and certainly the provost and president, have been encouraging faculty to, on a practical level, be understanding of our students, and understand that they may not be able to get an assignment in on time, and just having that sense of humanity is so important. And this fits in with the University of San Francisco Jesuit mission. We are one of the oldest Catholic universities in the country, and that is certainly one of the reasons why I left the University of Vermont to teach at USF, because USF, in its mission, is dedicated to equity. Now, how that plays out oftentimes is another story, but on a practical level, we believe that that every student deserves an opportunity, and we have probably about 14,000 students at the university, so it's a mid-sized institution. But I think having, just receiving that message from the top, that faculty really are encouraged to be supportive and understanding, is a very real piece of it, because I'm sure we all have faculty members in our lives at some degree who could care less what's going on in the world. If your assignment is not in, or it's late, then you'll be penalized. And that's what we don't want to happen at USF. This is a very challenging time. It's a very scary time. During the fall will be a scary time, and we want faculty to approach their classes with a sense of goodwill and to believe that students are doing the best that they can. And then if that can't happen, there's some problems with that faculty member that needs to be attended to. But we do believe that this is a good approach, and it's one that the university is very serious about seeing through. So that's it. That's all that I will comment on right now. So.
Thank you so much. So any other comments to that question?
Are we going in reverse? Wait.
I know we're yeah, exactly.
I just jumped in front of Jade. I'm sorry, Jade.
No.
Sorry, I messed up the order. I'm sorry.
No, that's
No, it's just fine. It's perfect, actually.
I just had one point that I'm just going to elevate. I mean, I could go off on this for a long time. So at the University of Illinois at Chicago, ever since they made this proclamation about asynchronous and all this stuff, I have been bombarded with online learning courses that I am required to take so I can basically re-prep all of my classes. They're giving us online course builders, but I don't know. I treat each and every one of my courses like my babies. Like it's mine. I want to know what's in there. I want to, like, it's going to be tough, but they've thrown all these resources at us. But I don't know if it was Richard or Meghna. I apologize, but I think it was Richard where you were mentioning, well, but how about the sessions around truth and reconciliation for those of us who are not feeling great right now? I mean, again, my condolences, Rich. It's blowing my mind. It just struck me today because I work on this racial equity project with the forest preserves of Cook County. And literally 2 days ago, I got a call from the deputy superintendent saying, hey, I know you guys are working on racial equity stuff, but can you help us get something going to help with our staff, both not just for truth and reconciliation, but also white allyship, because just being real, 80% of the staff are white. So they're already all over it, right? They get it. And they're trying to figure that out. I have heard nothing from my university about that. And I also think, to your point, Richard, about faculty, I hope that they will be more understanding, but we can also push our institutions to require that they be more understanding. You know, that's part of your promotion review. That's part of, you know, how we rank you as a member of our community, that it's not just how much you publish, but it's how you are also supporting staff and students around you, like reviews, just things that, I mean, like real reviews, not the weird evaluations you give. So that's just, I'm struck in this conversation how I heard nothing from my university with respect to those critical pieces that we're uplifting in this conversation.
So you all truly are a hard act to follow. I'll just add that I've been sort of busy trying to respond to some of the questions that have been asked in the chat feature and provide additional resources, because some people did ask for resources. So if I messed up some of those resources, I'll get back to it. I promise I will. I do want to say that I want the universities and the colleges to acknowledge the pain that we are experiencing. In addition to my back hurting so bad and my eyes hurting from the small laptop that I am using as my office, I do want to say that, you know, I feel for those in authority to make decisions about when we open, how we deliver classes, how we ensure safety for our children, our students, right? Who we often think of as our children in a way in that we protect them and we protect the way in which we share our knowledge and our experiences and our thoughts, especially about our fields. And so the one thing that I do know is that it's also our responsibility to push, push, and push, especially when we know that the work is really important. And so on the Senate hearing call today, I heard a elected official push and say faculty and staff should be at the table when decisions about when you open, how you open, and in what way we conduct the business of higher education is done. And that made me feel really good. But then quietly and secretly at night, I admit that I'm not really focused on my children, my personal children, my family, but I'm focused on, my students. And so I've been trying to learn about contact tracing because I believe that um, we're going to need a lot of people in colleges and universities who understand that skill. And as a program evaluator, I do understand that skill, but I need to, re-up my skill set. So I've been trying to obtain a certification with that. I've also been working on obtaining a certification through Quality Matters. Thankfully, my university has sponsored me to take a class. So they're pouring money into what I know and what I can do to help train me to make assurances that in the event that I elect to teach online, that my courses meet the university rigor that's expected, right? And so I've been doing that, and I'm thankful for that opportunity. What I've learned is that everything that NASPAA has been doing regarding accreditation and quality and standards, it really aligns with the rest of the field, right? And so our mission driven approach, the learning activities, the things that we teach our students and require that they do, the resources that we share with them, the activities that we share at the NASPAA conferences and such, those are the kinds of things that assure the online learning that we're offering in the interim is going to work. It is true that maybe you all are in a position where you want to share your hopes and dreams, but I also have fears that I want to share. My fear is that we're going to shut down the campus abruptly again because of the virus. And when that happens, I think that we need to get ready. We need to make sure that we understand what the expectations of online learning are and that we prepare to keep teaching, right? That's what we do. We do research. We could do that anywhere, but we have to keep teaching our students. And so in the event that there's another healthcare crisis, we have to do to keep teaching. And so the one last thing I want to tell you is that I really think it's really important. I'm proud of our provost at NC State, and this is not a plug for the provost. It's just an honest declaration that I am proud of him. He is pushing us forward in terms of the way in which we prepare for the fall semester. He's requiring that all of us who are teaching in the fall develop academic continuity plans. And I'm going to tell you, it shook me a little bit when I had to determine who was going to teach my class in the event of my death or severe illness, right? That's not something that I was ready to face right away. And so I think that that's a really important conversation to be had on campuses, that we plan and we prepare for this coronavirus and the impact that it has on higher education, not only in the fall, but in the spring or until we get a vaccine or an effective treatment plan. And so I think that I want to just leave you with that academic continuity is a serious matter, that we know that race still matters in America and around the world. And the fact that we have this double crisis, as Dr. Gooden has mentioned, has alerted us, has put fire under some of us. The reality is it's our call to action. And so it's time for us to focus on the main thing and get to work.
Sure.
Please.
McAllis, if I can piggyback on Dr. Barry James' comments, I so appreciate what you just said, particularly around the, having the fear, which, I think that everyone here shares your thoughts on that. I also want to mention specifically that I think public administration is really in a better position than a lot of other academic fields in that many of our MPA programs are already online, right? So for example, the University of San Francisco, we offer the MPA online and the MPA on campus or on ground as we call it. And so therefore, when we had to make the sudden switch to go online and back in March, it wasn't an issue for our program. And in fact, as the department chair, I was trying to make sure that I positioned us as leaders of this technology for other faculty and departments to come to us for consultation and so forth. And so I would like to encourage each of us, and particularly those of us who have administrative roles within our departments and so forth, to see this as an opportunity to have our colleagues know that public administration has this, right? And that we are resources for the university or the college, and people can come to us. I mean, so many of my colleagues have come to me, colleagues who I didn't even know still worked at the university, quite frankly, came to me for consultation about their online courses. And I'm not, trust me, I'm not an expert in online courses, even though I've been teaching in the program for 10 years already. But in terms of the logistics, we use Canvas here. Some colleges and universities may use Blackboard, others may use something else. So, you know, whatever the platform is, I think is worth investigating so that you and your program or your programs can become a resource for your institution. And again, we're always trying to make sure that public administration is seen as a leader in this entire situation. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for these comments. I mean, they're absolutely wonderful. Received a lot of messages, private messages about questions people would like to ask. I actually had one person actually requesting to another question to be put ahead of hers, so that's fine. And I'd just like to emphasize to everyone, we will be sharing any resources that are shared in the chat through an email tomorrow. So the first person in the queue is Teresa Vincent, and then we're going to go to Pooja Paswan, then Laurie D, and then Wendy Nicholson, and then Rachel Emas. So Teresa, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Sean. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge just the wonderful amount of participants and the very varied backgrounds that we have here. And so I would like to encourage our participants to speak up or write in your comments. If you should have a specific comment to address one of the questions that Sean posed to our panelists, and you have something you'd like to share, please do so. We would love to hear that because really we would love to harness the collective brain trust in this virtual room so that we can possibly identify more ideas and solutions. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Sean.
Sean, I'm sorry, again, I interrupted. If I can just give a shout out and thank you to Dr. Vincent. She has been just extraordinarily amazing with all of these webinars. And she is, I'm just meeting her, but I already love her already. And trust me, as a New Yorker, we don't love too many people too fast. So, but she is just fabulous. And what a wonderful addition to DSJ and to our great field. So thank you so much, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you. So I believe our next comment is...
Thank you so much.
I think our next comment is by Dr. Pooja Paswan. So Pooja, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Great seminar. My question is to everybody in the panel. So in India, we recently moved to the online teaching. What happens in the campuses, especially in the central university campuses that are situated in big cities, when students come from different backgrounds, particularly students coming from Dalits and other minorities, especially women, they need constant motivation, they need constant support, they need constant, and I cannot emphasize this enough or stress this enough, that we have to be there for them physically, we have to encourage them, we have to look at their submissions, assignments. We have to guide them, and those students have actually done very, very well. Now, with the COVID pandemic, that particular face-to-face guidance is missing. We are not there for them, and when they go back to their environment where the families are not supportive, or they favor the male child as to the female child, here comes the problem as the quality of the assignment, the quality of the work, and even their presence in an online class is diminishing. So, like Dr. Professor Meghna Sabharwal said, that even we have to talk about social equity in spite, or even if the pandemic is not there. COVID pandemic did not break the system. It just showed us the chinks in the armor. This is one issue that we have to talk about. That what about those students who are eventually left behind because they have absolutely no support from their family or from the institution or administration for that? So what do we do about those students who are left behind? Because the pandemic that has gone for a year or even more, we don't know about that. Those students whom the family, they're supported enough to bring them to New Delhi and make them study on a scholarship, they cannot do so well without us.
Great comments and questions. Yes.
Pooja, firstly, it's 1:30 in Delhi and you are up, so 1:30 a.m. I must emphasize, not afternoon. So I really appreciate that your passion comes through. There are several different layers, I think, in an Indian context with going online teaching, which has never been done, I imagine. We just did the first online webinar at your institution. And how long has Jamia existed? Over 100 years?
Yes, 100 years. Yes.
Over 100 years, and that was the first online webinar that was done in conjunction with Sika, ASPA, and other scholars ever. So, from that going suddenly online, complete online teaching, and Jamia is a minority serving institution where you teach. And that's very, very challenging. You just highlighted those concerns that several of us even face here in the United States. But India, it's a different issue with a lot of the cultural issues, the gender issues you pointed out, the class and the caste issues, the religious. So there are several more layers that come with makes your job harder, I think, as an instructor. I know that instructors are spending more time now just talking to students on the phone. We were doing that anyways, but I think now that probably you doing the same and other faculty where you may not be able to meet them face to face, but you probably just sitting there encouraging them, you being the counselor, you're being the professor, you being the mom, you being the academic. So you're wearing several hats right now, and it is very, very challenging at this. And so kudos to you and all the faculty there that are probably dealing with these issues. The other issue is bandwidth issues in India, internet issues. That's another, and that we are facing right now here. I mean, I have internet challenges every day. And so I know that in India and other places, they are using mobile phones to do online lectures because phone accessibility is a lot more than even having a computer or a laptop. So I know there's innovation happening, and I say that innovation happens in times of crisis. And this is the time that we are innovating. We all are innovating in our own ways. Institutions of higher education are forced to innovate. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm an optimist at heart, and I'm looking at the positives that come out of this. So I hope there's a different kind of learning too. I don't know if I answered your question, but again, thank you for being there for all the students.
I would like to offer up, and I agree with my dear colleague 100%, Dr. Meghna, with your comments, very insightful. I also want to say thank you to our colleague and our guest for being up this late in India to be a part of this panel. That just is so amazing to me. But what I would like, what I would like to suggest also is that you're surrounded by resources with people on this Zoom call and specifically this panel. And I'm going to actually volunteer this entire panel to do a panel for your students or your colleagues, regardless of what time that is. We would avail ourselves. And that is a promise that I can give to you. Not, of course, I haven't spoken to any of my colleagues on on this panel, but I'm sure they concur with me.
And to add in, DSJ will host. We will host any of them that you offer.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. McAllis, because we want you to know that even though you are in India, you're still right here and you're part of us. That's what we do. And so whatever topic we can we need to discuss for the panel or panels with the S, please let us know. Connect with Dr. McAllis, and he will get the logistics together. But I want to give you my promise now that we're here for you, and you won't have to walk alone. And your students, we will collectively make sure that they're fine, because it does take a village.
Thank you, Richard. We are all in this together. Like we said, and we will do any panel anytime. If you can be up at 1:30 a.m., I'm sure we can be too.
That's right. That's right.
Yes, absolutely. We are behind you and we're with you, and count on us. And I wanted just to say what a wonderful exchange that was. Thank you so much for your contribution. That was wonderful. And I wanted to share that up next, we have Lori. I think you have a question for us or a comment. Please go.
Hey, Laura, you should be unmuted now. Okay, let me. Looks like.
Am I on?
There you are. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
She's still muted.
Laura, you're still muted. There you go.
All right, good, good. Usually people like it when I'm muted, so people are happy when I'm not. My name is Laurie DePadova Stocks. I'm at Park University. And this wasn't part of my comment, but I will observe since it came up. I'm an avowed traditionalist in higher education. Face-to-face is where it's at and so forth. But I have to say, this university has been online since before Google was. So I learned online course development, online learning, and I have to say that I have strikingly more personal relationships with many of my online students. Mm-hmm. As well as I teach face-to-face, have a good relationship with them too, as expected. But it is amazing how they feel free to speak up. They're from all over the world, coast to coast and so forth. And online, they will share some very interesting things that they would not share in a face-to-face class. Plus, they do have time to do it. They have all week. So as you know who teach online, you understand that the online students are with you 24/7. Your kids, Jade, are with you 24/7. It's not just once or twice a week. But the comment is that, in addition to COVID, and I think since my comment has been mentioned, this nation is at a social equity inflection point. COVID has awakened our flaws as a nation in terms of healthcare and inequality in terms of income and so forth, but also with the tragedy in Minneapolis that makes it hard for even the most hardest of people not to weep. This is surfacing our sickness as a nation, our generations of sickness, our actually centuries of sickness, and our inhumanity to African Americans and people of color. So I see the nation as traumatized, both those who are protesters and then seeing the rioters and the looters who, and many don't have the right motives, value-based motives. In terms of being helpful, they seek to destroy the purpose for the protest. And so I think we need to be prepared to address these with our students, to be aware, to acknowledge them in a way, and to have them feel safe with us. That sure, you know, I may be teaching a leadership class, but or a theory class, but they need to be safe with each other and safe with me. And somehow I need to convey that. It starts with us. We teach students. We don't just teach subject matter. In the final analysis, we teach students.
Those excellent comments. Pamela, would you like to weigh in? Thank you, Lori. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Would the panel like to weigh in?
Sure.
I agree.
Hi, this is Jade.
Go ahead, Jade.
I just want to say it was so great to see Lori on this panel. And you know, we've been in NASPAA together for a long time, and so I know where your heart is, and I also know your passion for our field and for our students. I will say that it is our obligation when we know, right? There are some people who are just waking up this week, right? Who are just seeing what some of the disproportionality looks like and how bad it is, right? It is true that we don't necessarily see the disproportionality, the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on the African American community. We don't necessarily see that on the Hispanic community. We might read about it, but we are safely tucked away in the suburbs or the urban centers or in our rural communities. And so we're not up close and personal with it unless we're serving on the front line or unless we are part of a healthcare professional system. But the truth is that for the first time in a very long time, we have seen what hate looks like, quite frankly. Or we've seen that race still matters. We've seen that there are some things that go against our professional standards, our ethical obligations, the kinds of promises that we've made. I was raised by a public administrator. My grandmother worked in the mental health system for the state of New Jersey for 45 years. I am the child of a public servant, and many of us are. And we know how great the public sector is, but we also know the work that we have to do. And so I'm just encouraged that cooler heads have prevailed and that we understand what we have to do. We have to continue to teach. Well, I'll say it in a way that is commonly phrased. We have to continue to talk the talk and also walk the walk, right? When we see those outcomes that represent disparities, long-standing disparities, whether it be in health or education, employment, justice, juvenile justice, all kinds of disparities, food insecurity, these are serious disparities that we have the power to fix. It's our superpower, right? We can see it, we know what to do about it, but we have to get to work, and that's really the focus. I really am focused on working. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I also just want to thank Lori for her comments and just for her commitment to social equity and fair and justice and all of this, because without the Loris in the world, it would be difficult for us to advance as a field, whether that's even through ASPA or NASPA. Lori, thank you so much for your commitment. And it's not easy. This work is not easy, as everyone here will say, but it's essential and it's critical. And so in your dark moments, I want you to be encouraged that we're all in this together, which is a common refrain from this webinar. But I think it's an important refrain in that we're here to help each other. And even though you are at Park University and I'm across the country at USF and Magna is in Texas and Jade is in North Carolina, right? And our the other colleague is in Chicago. We're all still joined by this concept called social equity. And And people may not want to hear that all the time, but we have an obligation to share it. And so we thank you for your continuation of sharing and being a part of this movement, because that's what we're in, a movement.
You're here. Okay, so what I would like to do right now, we have Wendy Nicholson is next. Wendy, I think you should now be able to unmute, so floor is yours. Wendy? Well, actually, I think we have Wendy's question earlier in the chat. I'm just going to go ahead and read it out. And if Wendy, if anytime the microphone starts working, just feel free to come in. So the question was, I'd like to ask how we as scholars and students can partner with white allies effectively, ensuring that they understand that allyship does not equate to ownership. And just to make sure everyone sees that question, I am reposting the exact wording of the question in the chat from earlier.
Well, I'll just jump in very quickly. I was just talking about this with a colleague yesterday, and what we do know about allyship, specifically white allyship, is that it's critical to helping any movement go forward. So as a social equity scholar, I also focus on social movements. And certainly if we look at the movements of the 1960s, whether that's the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, LGBT movement and so forth, women's movement, we know that that white folks locked arms specifically with Black folks and brown folks and everyone else. And this is something that we need to make sure that the community recognizes. And also, one of the things that I always tell my colleagues, specifically at USF, is that, you know, diversity and inclusion and social equity should not be on the backs, squarely on the backs of people of color and women. It takes all of us to pitch in and help. And so one of my colleagues texted me, Dr. McCallens, because he had to take off, but I'll share this text with you. And he wanted to know where the men were in the webinar, and hopefully there are men here, because men are part of this equation, particularly white men, and we need them to help us to advance this cause. And so so I think that we as those in these communities have an obligation to also reach across the aisle to our white brethren and sisters, and to say, you're welcome to be a part of us. You are a part of, you're part of us, and we need your help. Not to take over, but we need your help to work with us to make sure that things are advanced for the good.
So it's interesting because I'm thinking a lot about the white allyship stuff. So the core of my work is racial equity. So, you know, I spend a lot of time trying to disentangle that from implicit bias trainings and truth and reconciliation and everything else people want to throw in there. And so it's been interesting because I think there's definitely a two-pronged approach that we kind of need right now, truly, in our discipline, in our departments. And one is more of the institutional response. Like, how do we convince or just demand that having more money spent on actually helping us process the trauma we're going through, and to train those of our colleagues who identify as white around what allyship really means, should actually be a resource that's expended institutionally, because it actually will lead to better outcomes for all of us. We have to prove that over and over and over again. So that's one part. But the second part is just creating a space where we can just process with each other so that we can just get through this period of time. And that's just, I don't know how to do that. I mean, I think we're all doing that in our different networks, but institutionally, I'd love to be able to make the case to administrators that if you actually considered this emotion piece, this emotion work piece, this truth and if you did do that and you expended as many resources as you are, forcing us to go take online classes, to turn our classes into asynchronous courses and all the technical things, that you might actually have a better outcome. We might actually be better instructors in the end, not just because of technical, but because of this other component. I'd love to be able to make that case. I can't right now, but I really do think that's something that we should work on and just continue to try to prove the point.
Right.
The only the only other thing that I would add to what has already been shared today is that, I'm just gonna speak from my truth. Every time I pay my taxes, every time, I recognize that I can't send my children to public school because I look at the disparate outcomes by race and by gender. So my black daughters would not have a fair shake at an education that my tax dollars already support. And when I think about which hospitals that I have to go to, even when I'm in urgent care, I have to look at the outcomes for those hospitals to make sure that they have good outcomes for people who look like me. And when I'm driving down the street and a police officer pulls me over with his gun drawn, I think about, the work that I've done in juvenile justice and in community justice, right? And I think about, as I told my daughters, when I meet a police officer on the street, when they meet a police officer on the street, they are our friends, right? And I have to lie to my children and say, they are your friends. And the only thing that you should do is everything they ask you to do, because that's the only way, maybe, that you'll come home safely. But then I think about the reality. My reality is that when the officer pulls me over for no reason with his gun drawn just because I'm black, that the only thing that I'm going to do is whatever he tells me to do so I can get home safely to my children. And this is the system that I support every time I pay my taxes. Every single time I write a check to pay my taxes, I'm supporting a system that is riddled with injustice, that disparate outcomes are seen, they're realized every single day, and the only person that feels really bad about it are people who are willing to engage in this work. And so the work that Brandy and Tia are doing at the University of Cincinnati, that work around the MPA and the focus on social justice, for me, that's the real work in our field, because we as taxpayers in American context, we are supporting the system of inequity and injustice, unfairness that we see, right? And I'm not going to be protesting and carrying on, not in the way that I've seen this past week, right? I'm praying. I'm praying that we're going to get back to an America where we can get back to building on something that's really meaningful and really important, where we all have equal outcomes and there are equitable policies to address the problems that we as public administrators create. So that's all I want to add. Yeah, I think that's enough.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. And I have nothing much to add, but I would say, in this time and day and age, we should not be judged by the color of our skin, the way we look, the way we talk, our accents. Any of these should not define us. And unfortunately, it defines us every day. Even if we don't want it to define us, we are reminded of it every day. And that becomes one's reality, and that should not be the case. So this is the time. It's come many a times in our history, and I hope this is where we all can really rise up and raise our voices collectively and do something about this injustice. So um, it's just heartwarming.
Yes. And one of the things that I would just emphasize, since we're at the end of our time here, is if you do get a chance, please read DSJ's statement that we had released earlier. It was a collective effort of 9 really great DSJ members, many who are on this call. You know, we had Jade, we had Brandy, I was involved, you know, several others. Just be sure to take a look at that, because one of the things that the 9 of us really emphasized in that call is the importance of taking a collective stand, and that it's all of our common responsibility at the personal, group, organizational, systemic, societal levels, and so forth. What we'd like to do is, for any of you who still have questions, please email them to us. Parisa, I believe, is going to be sharing the DSJ Gmail. And I just want to thank everyone. This was a wonderful discussion. I think next time we do it, we could probably even get away with one question at the beginning and just open it up to the audience, because our panelists were just so great and the questions were so great. And I apologize for Wendy. I don't know why the mic didn't unmute, but we'll work on that. It was a great question.
If I could just say one thing before
please do.
First of all, just want to again thank you and DSJ and my colleagues and everyone for participating. So, and as a former DSJ president or chair, this really just is overwhelmingly so exciting for me to see the work that myself and the other presidents who have come before me, to see you now in action, leading the helm. That is just really quite amazing. And I'm so pleased that we have a sense that DSJ is alive and well and doing the work that it was called to do. And finally, I've not thought this through completely, but it would be great if we could secure us a symposium, journal symposium, out of these proceedings. And I think that would be amazing.
Dr. Johnson, I can't go into too many specifics. Dr. Barry James, Dr. Blessed know what I'm talking about. There is going to be a follow-up on this in a particular journal, but I think let's get this out there. We also are partnering with Public Integrity for our next ethics webinar series. All of these issues are on the table, and we'll in terms of who's invited and the issues we're going to be talking about. I said yes, let's make this as big as possible. And thanks to you, Dr. Johnson, because you got me involved in DSJ when I ran across the lobby of the Seattle hotel where NASPAA was that year, and I said, "Hey, you're the head of the Social Equity Leadership Conference this year," and you were just so gracious and wonderful, and I wouldn't be here without you.
It's my great pleasure.
Friend and co-author, and yeah, I love it. We just want to thank, special thanks again, I mean, really, especially to NASPAA DEI, especially Dr. El-Kadri, Dr. Blessed, and Dr. Wooldridge for helping make this happen. Just got some messages. We're going to be trying this again, DSJ and NASPAA DEI collaboration. And of course, to our 4 amazing panelists, Dr. Barry James, Dr. Johnson III, Dr. Yan Clayton, and Dr. Saberwal. And to all of you, especially for joining us. We'd really like for you to join our next webinar on promoting ethical competence on June 18th. It's a 6-part webinar, 1 a month, every month until November, and you're going to see some of these faces again. And I would just like to end with our common entreaty in DSJ. I end all of our webinars with this, but just remembering that it's our common responsibility to promote fairness at all levels. And we have to remember that the highest purpose of public service is to improve lives. So we have to do what is necessary at all levels, personal, group, organizational, systemic, and societal, to root out these injustices, make ourselves and make our institutions accountable for achieving social equity so that all public services truly do serve all justly. This is what this section is about, and as long as we're here in DSJ, we're going to keep this message up however we can. So thank you all. Keep an eye out for the recording, and please join us again. Write to the email democracysocialjusticeasp@gmail.com with questions, comments. We will be sharing the resources from this. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful day. End of the day.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.